working on the project of letting 20 to 30,000 children in, babies in. It never made it to the floor of the Senate for approval or an up and down vote. It died in committee. Not long after that, a very short time after that, a lady named Laura Delano Hotterly. Now, Delano is a very familiar name because it's the family name of the Roosevelts, a family name of the Roosevelt family. She was a cousin of the President of the United States, who, by the way, was very, very actively involved in trying to help Jews from the very early part of his career throughout his life. However, she had a dinner party, because anti-Semitism was so rife, so rampant in here in America, at a dinner party, boasted very proudly, and by the way, she was the wife of the Commissioner of Immigration to the United States of America. She boasted very proudly, thank God that bill didn't pass, 20 to 30,000 ugly children would too soon turn into 20 to 30,000 ugly adults, quote unquote. She boasted about that, and it was printed in the New York Times. There was no clamor, it's just a matter of opinion. Really? Really? So it wasn't a matter of fear, it was a matter of basic dislike and hate. We don't live in a perfect world. No one is perfect. Our laws aren't perfect, but we need to learn from the errors we've made in the past. When we think about the people who immigrate here, how are we going to vet them? Vet them means how are we going to look into their background? How are we going to make sure that they don't become a pariah on our society? How to make sure that they contribute to our society? How do we make sure that they're a positive impact on our society? Well, they passed the first major test. The people are going to be led to slaughter. The meek among them will be led to slaughter from the land that they're coming from. Whether it was the Jews at one time, whether it's Syria today, whether it's other parts of the world tomorrow. The people that come here, T.S., are the bold, the brave, the adventurous, the intelligent, and I think I just described the individualism that made America what it is today. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's a very, very touching story, and your comments and your stories is not only make a lot of common sense, very touching, and more importantly, that I think a lot of people can appreciate where you come from. And as an immigrant myself, and I came from Hong Kong, and my father came to this country 3 months before I was born. Right after the Second World War, China was invaded by Japan, and after 8 years of bombing and fighting, China became a place that have very little productivity, no food for the people, and no job. And the soldiers or the residents, they try to go home without garden, without 4 walls. And even though if they have 4 walls, they might not have a roof. So my father and my mother's family, fortunately, they lived close to Hong Kong. They were able to escape it from China to Hong Kong, because overnight, China at that time, they have a choice to make, to turn it to communism or let people die. I never was supporting communism. I don't believe in it. I am objecting to it. But during that time, I understand why things happen. And after my parents left China, they were able to live in Hong Kong, and they met and they married. Unfortunately, during that time, my father was unable to find a job. So he came to this country. And my mother encouraged him to come for a better future, because in Hong Kong at that time, there's no hope for the future, right after the Second World War. So my father left my mother 3 months before I was born. It took us 16 years later before myself and my mother to come into United States to rejoin my father as a family. And happily, 2 years later, I have a brother. His name is Ming. I'm very proud of him. But you can see, we came here legally. It took time. We understand. It takes a lot of patience. In contrast, today we had other people coming into our country because for other reasons and for other needs. So, I just want to share my story. We all immigrants, we all have different backgrounds.
T.S., let me ask you a question. I don't mean to cut across you.
Sure, no, I understand.
When you said it took 16 years, now, why did it take 16 years? Is it because your father was a playboy over here just enjoying the life, sucking off the welfare system? Why did it take 16 years before he sent for you and your mother? Tell us a story about that.
Well, that's a great question, sir. Because a lot of time, those times, right after the Second World War, the people came to this country without appropriate documents. So you had to go through all these immigration rules and regulations, providing information, prove your residency, make sure that you don't have no violation of laws or anything like that. So at the time I was so young, so I don't know all the details, but when I came to this country, I was so happy. I was not going to America. I was coming home because my father was in here. So when I stepped out of my airplane, I felt like, oh, this is a land of freedom. I can breathe with these fresh airs. I want to make a good citizen of the United States. I want to do this, I want to do that. But more importantly, I want to help people. I want to help people. And that was my goal when I come to this country. So today, we all have different backgrounds, and I do appreciate all the immigrants that came to this country. So we talk about immigration, and we want to talk about how can help America to be stronger with all these immigrants from different ethics, different backgrounds, and different areas. We all have challenges in life. You know, when you look at all the Indians, they immigrated to this country for a reason. We have all these Englishmen came to this country for different reasons. So we want to look at the bigger picture. So now I talked for the last 5-7 minutes. It's your turn, sir. Oh, by the way, happy wife, happy life. I said that since I was 21 years old. It was not easy.
So in other words, your book just says happy wife, happy... No, it doesn't. It says lots of good things in it. T.S., one of the things I got from my relationship with you is that your father worked extremely hard. He was not, in Yiddish it's a vance, in English it's a bloodsucker. He wasn't a bloodsucker on society when he came here. He wasn't waiting for someone to give him a hand out. Maybe he got a hand up, but he certainly did not get a handout. He worked hard for 16 years. That's how he could afford to bring you and your mother here. And then when you came here, you did the same thing. Why did you do the same thing? Because by example, you learned from your father. You did what your father did. The whole point of this discussion that I want to bring to a focal point is that the people that arrive here are not the weaklings, they're the strong ones. If we're going to vet the people that come here, there's already been a screening process. The screening process will only allow the fittest to survive. It's cruel, but that's nature. All through evolution, the fittest will survive. So we have that part of the process already done. Will we be able to stop any person who would ever want to do harm in the United States of America? No. I don't know how many Syrian immigrants that we've allowed into our country since this problem has arisen over the last 4 years. But I do know this because I have a good friend of mine who is I'm going to say it right, Ahmadi Muslim, and he's an intellect and a scholar. I read an op-ed piece that he wrote when he was a student at the law school at the University of Richmond. I was so impressed I had to meet him. We've been friends ever since. He's written 3 books. He's been interviewed on all the major news networks. He goes around the world talking about the proper aspect of what the Muslim people really are. And one of the things he made clear in one of his recent posts is that all these terrible Syrians have come over to our country, whether they're several hundred or several thousand, I don't really know the exact number. But here's the total number of immigrants from Syria that have done us harm, terrorist harm. 0 is the total amount. During that same time, 24 American-born people, American-born Muslims, have done terrible harm to us. He and I and other right-thinking people appreciate that there is no religion in the world that goes out and tells you to harm and maim babies, children, women, or the uninformed. That isn't a religion. That's a horror craze. That's worse than any movie or any Halloween evening that you could possibly conjure. So the problem isn't what exists, the problem is what our perception of that is. The perception of what immigrants are is important. The true immigrants are people like me. True immigrants are people like T.S. Eliot, T.S.Chin.
Oh, I'm so proud that you called me T.S. Eliot. You know, if I get a 5% of that, you know, I would be very, very happy.
Two of your authors. That's I started calling you T.S. after you had published your book.
Thank you.
So this is, look at my face. This is what the face of a true immigrant is. A person who really appreciates and loves America. No one ever gave me anything. I worked hard. I left home when I was 18 years old. I never looked back. I went to the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy because I played football. They wanted me to play football as a tough schoolboy all-star. And I went on to graduate from the academy. Not an easy place to graduate from. And by the way, those of you who don't know, there are 5 federal service academies: Army, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard. And the pearl of them all is the United States Merchant Marine Academy at Kings Point. Now, after I got out of the academy, I had a Bachelor of Science degree, I had a reserve commission in the Navy, U.S. Navy, and I had to work really hard, Chin, and study very hard. And I had to take an exam that lasted 5 days, 8 hours a day, to prove my proficiency as a 3rd officer on board any size vessel, anywhere, traveling anywhere in the world. It's called an unlimited 3rd mate's license. Now, eventually, I kept working hard on the ship and working hard on after a certain period of time working really hard on a ship, I was allowed to take the next exam to prove my proficiency at the next level. I then became a 2nd officer, a 2nd mate. Again, unlimited license.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And then eventually, I matriculated as captain of 10 different ships. But my interest span was so broad that I kept moving from one company to the next company. So I was captain for 3 different companies. That's what the face of an immigrant is. Mm-hmm. A hard-working industrial, full of industry. I want to also share with you that some people would call me a Holocaust survivor. I was born in the correct time for them to have said that. However, my father was not a survivor. My father made it through the war as a partisan. My mother was not a survivor. She made it through the war as a partisan. My twin brother and I were not. And the reason I say none of us were survivors, T.S., is because I think of a person who thinks of himself as a survivor is a person that feels as he is a victim. And in line with your concept of happy life, if you feel you're the victim all the time, you're not going to get any place above the sewer, above the curb. If you think of yourself as a refugee, that means you had a hard time, you've overcome it. Mm-hmm. Here in Richmond, we have a good example of different politicians doing good things, different politicians doing bad things. There's no time that anyone was born that said, I want to grow up, and I know what, I want to be a drug dealer, I want to be a gangster, Here in Richmond, who was the mayor that was governor?
Well, let me interrupt you a little bit, because we want to move on a little bit, a broader subject other than immigration, because I respect your story and I love it, and I want to thank you for sharing your story with us. Our audience, I think we all understand that 99% of the immigrants are good people, and there's no question about it. I know a lot of Chinese, Vietnamese, Muslims and people coming from Mexico, especially Mexico